Hello everybody! In this lesson, I will help you prepare for your June exam. In this lesson, I will discuss question 1, equations, and this is from the 2021 paper 1. Here you can see from the CAPS document, algebra and solving equations and inequalities will count around about 25 out of the 150. In this paper, question 1 counts 24, which is 16% of the paper. Remember, this is a grade 11 topic, and there's also a whole playlist on solving quadratic equations on my channel. But let's go to the question. This is what the actual question looks like. I suggest that you pause the video and quickly do the question, and then you can use the rest of the video to mark your work and see how the examiners mark your questions. Question 1.1 wants you to solve for x. You will find that this is a quadratic equation and it's already written in a proper descending order and equal to 0. You say that it is in standard form. The factors of 24 are 6 and 4, and you want the middle term to be -2. So how can 6 and 4 give you -2? -6 plus 4 is -2. And then you add your x there and you add your x there. So your next step, your factors, x minus 6, x plus 4, and this is worth 1 mark. Final answer, x is equal to 6 or x is equal to -4. There, this is worth 3 marks already. Question 1.2 wants us to solve for x, and then they give you a quadratic equation, and then they say correct to 2 decimal places. So this is your hint that you're going to use the quadratic formula. Another hint is if they say leave your answer in third form, then you know it's the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula you find on the formula sheet. Unfortunately, there's no marks there by just jotting it down. With the substitution, I just want to focus your attention to once this quadratic equation is in standard form, remember this coefficient of x squared, that means the number in front of x squared, that is your a value. The coefficient of x is your b value, and then the constant number over there, that is your c value. So when you substitute, remember when you substitute we use brackets, write them down, then you cannot make a mistake. And for the substitution, you get 1 mark. When you slot all of this into your calculator, this is what you get. But if you give that as your answer, unfortunately, you will be penalized because the question said correct to 2 decimal places. So where do you find that? You go to the 1 second to the third number after the comma. If this is a 5 and greater, then it's going to change this number to the next number. And the same goes here. You go to the third number greater than 5, a 5 or greater, it's going to change that number. So this is why your answer here is 2,19 or x is minus 0,69. And this is worth a mark, this is worth a mark because of correct to 2 decimal places. On number 1.3, we have to solve this quadratic inequality. So solving a quadratic inequality is like solving a quadratic equation, but it's right at the end where you are going to write your answer, either as an inequality or as interval notation. So your first step is to write your inequality in standard form, and just by doing that, taking this -4 across, this is worth 1 mark. Now we're going to factorize. How do we factorize? The factors of 4 are 4 and 1. This number, we want a +5, so +4 + 1 will give us +5. That is why that's the factors. Now what to do next is something that we find the critical values. So how do we find them? That's easy. You just take your factor x plus 4, you equate it to 0, and you get your first critical value, and the same way will be with x plus 1. And for writing down critical values, you are awarded another mark. So what you do next is you give yourself a number line where -4, your critical values, will be there, and -1 will be there. And then when this is a smaller and equal to inequality, your answer will lie between -1 and -4. And how you will write that in between the two numbers as an answer, as an inequality, is you write x, you write this number that side, the -4 that side, and then your inequality signs will always face this way. So this reads as x is smaller equal to -1. In fact, it means those values. And x is greater equal than -4. That means those values there. So all the values that you find there will satisfy this inequality. So I wrote it for you there. This is worth 2 marks. So just be careful. You can either write it as an inequality, your answer, or this is called interval notation. This and that is exactly the same. On number 1.4, your equation that contains a surd, the first step is to make sure that the left-hand side where you find the surd is alone and everything else is on the right-hand side. And then your next step is you're going to square both sides. And when you square both sides, just be careful that you don't square here on the right-hand side each term individually. You square it as a unit like that. And then on the left-hand side, when you square the square root, it falls away and you're left with this x plus 28. And on the right-hand side, this 2 minus x squared becomes 2 brackets, and you're going to FOIL out your 2 brackets, and then you write it, you multiply it out and you write it in standard form. By the way, by squaring both sides, that's where you get your first mark, and writing it in standard form, that's where you get your next mark. Then you're going to factorize this. Then you're going to say the factors of 24 are 8 and 3. You want the middle term to be -5. How can 8 and 3 give you -5? -8 plus 3 is -5. So your factors are x minus 8, x plus 3. You solve them, you end with x is 8 or x is -3. But when you are dealing with an equation that contains a surd, you have to test your answers for validity. And what does that mean? That means you take 8 and you're going to sub it into the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And if it yields the same answer, then it's valid. And you will also take x is -3 and substitute it into the left and the right-hand side. If you get the same answer, it's valid. So now if you take the x is 8 and you substitute it into the right-hand side of your equation, you find the answer is -6. And if you take that very same 8 and you sub it into the left-hand side of your equation, you find now the answer is 6. So one is -6, the other is just 6. So therefore, x is equal to 8 will not be a valid solution. If you take x is -3 and you sub it in, then you will see both answers are the same. So where's your other 2 marks? Your other mark is for writing down the factors, and your last mark is for just giving me that x is -3 is the only solution. X is not equal to 8. No answer there. On number 1.2, we need to solve simultaneously for x and y, and then they give you 2 equations. That's a straight line, and that is a circle. So my advice to you is, in your easiest equation of the two, get either x or y alone. And here I would rather make x the subject of the formula, because if you do it for y, then you're going to end with fractions, and you want to avoid fractions at all cost. So what I did here was I took the 3 across to the other side, and you label this equation 1. This is worth a mark. Then you take your other equation and you label it equation 2. Now you're going to substitute equation 1 into equation 2, and with that I mean, in this other equation, everywhere where you see an x, you are going to substitute 2y minus 3. There you can see, there used to be an x, now there's what x was equal to, and there used to be x squared, and that is what x is used to be equal to. And then for the substitution, you get a mark. Now this one, you will just multiply it out, and this one becomes 2 brackets, so you multiply everything out, and that is worth a mark. You get it into standard form. By getting it into standard form, it's worth a mark. And now, if you are good with factorization, you can make your 2 brackets and find your factors, or you can even use the quadratic formula here to find your 2 values for y. And then you've got your 2 values for y. That is worth 1 mark. And then your corresponding x values, you will get them by taking 2y minus 3 is equal to x. This was your first equation. So in y's place, you will put the half, and your x will be -2. And again, in y's place, you will substitute in -1, and you will substitute in 1, I beg your pardon, and then your x value is -1. For your 2x values, that is also worth 1 mark. On number 1.3, they want us to say that the roots of an equation are, and then they give you this where x are equal to that, and that resembles the quadratic formula. Where m, n, and p are positive real numbers, the numbers m, n, and p in that order form a geometric sequence. That's an important bit. Prove that x is a non-real number. Right, how do we prove that a number is non-real? If we can prove that the discriminant is smaller than 0, then it's a non-real number. So they tell us that m, n, and p are positive and that they form a geometric sequence. So you can write them m, n, p, and do you agree this is T1, this is T2, and T3? And since this is a geometric sequence, we can work out R. R is T2 over T1, and when you substitute, then your R is N over M, but also R is also T3 over T2, so then it's going to be P over N. And then both are equal to R, therefore we can equate them. And then you can also cross multiply, and you get m squared is equal to mp. So now what? I said in the beginning that to prove it's a real number, you need to show or prove that the discriminant is smaller than 0. So where do you find the discriminant? The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. And remember, this part comes from this part over here. Whatever you find there under the root in your quadratic equation. So therefore, can you see the delta, the discriminant, is in fact n squared minus 4np. And now your problem is you've got 3 different variables, and this is going to be difficult to work with it. But do you agree, just a while ago, we said that n squared is equal to np. So what we do, in the place of np, we substitute with n squared. And now we have one variable that we can deal with. So if we work that out, we get that delta is negative 3n squared. And you're nearly there. Now you just explain and you reason it out to the examiner. Do you agree? N squared will always be bigger than 0 because of the square. A plus or a minus times a minus is a plus. And then the minute you add the negative 3, then suddenly your whole term becomes smaller than 0. So here, in fact, you have then proven that your delta is smaller than 0. Therefore, x is a non-real number. And you'll see that this question counted 4 marks. So where were the marks? The marks were here where you equated your two r's and you made n squared the subject of the formula for calculating delta, and then all of this for reasoning out that it's a non-real number. In the next lesson, I will discuss question 2 of your exam. This will be sequences and series. You can click on the video in the left-hand corner on top there to take you straight to the next video. And then I have also added the playlist on grade 11 solve quadratic equations for you if you want to go back to that one.